I'm still pretty new to the One Piece community, but even in the relatively short time that I've been here, there's one early arc I've seen come up in conversation more than almost any other arc, and that is Skypiea. Skypiea seems to have a mixed review amongst the community. Before watching, I saw people on Twitter saying the pacing is horrible, the side characters aren't very interesting, and that the story felt disconnected from the rest of One Piece. But at the same time, I also saw people saying it was one of the most interesting arcs in the series, and that it apparently becomes a lot more important later on. So I went into my watch with an open mind to give my honest review, and what I can tell you is the story of Skypiea is by far the best adventure this show has created in my watch yet. So let's get into a review of one of the best adventures yet, Skypiea.
Now ring it, Straw Hat! Light the fire of Shandora!
Now, if this is your first time seeing a video of mine, welcome. If you don't know, I do have a long review video of everything leading up to the Skypiea saga on my channel already. If you'd like to go watch that first and come back to this one, feel free, or don't, it's up to you. I'm not your captain. And if you have been around, thank you so much for tuning in again. The support you guys have been showing me has been unreal. You'll notice that this video is out of order of my watch timeline, as I wasn't sure if I was actually going to go back and make a video on this saga, but so many of you requested it, and I also really do love the saga anyway, so I was happy to go back and make it. In this video, I'm going to cover both the Jaya and Skypiea arcs. I'll give my overall thoughts on characters and storylines, some of my favorite moments, and how I felt watching these episodes. This arc is truly massive in the amount of things it packs in, so I'm going to really try to do my best to cover all the stuff that I found important. But with that said, let's get into a review of the first arc of the saga, Jaya. After the epic story of Alabasta had fully unfolded, the Straw Hats continue their journey deeper into the Grand Line with their newest crew member, Nico Robin. Robin joining the crew was really exciting, and kind of crazy considering all the arcs leading up to Alabasta, you're kind of led to believe Vivi would be the next crew member. However, I think this was a blessing in disguise that she forced herself to join, as I don't think the crew realized how much getting a new member would mean to them after no longer having Vivi, especially for Nami to have another girl on board. Robin has this calming nature about her, definitely a more mature personality coming into this loving crew of idiots that I knew would make her an interesting addition, along with her vast knowledge of the world, of course. With Robin on board, the crew sets sail for their next adventure. In my opinion, what the Jaya arc does really well is begin setting up the mystery and scale of the adventure that's about to take place, while also introducing us to a lot of important upcoming characters. The arc opens when a massive 200-year-old pirate ship suddenly falls out of the sky near the Going Merry. As the crew tries to process what the hell just happened, Nami notices her log post is pointing straight up into the sky, which Robin confirms is not by accident. While digging through the wreckage, Luffy discovers potential evidence of an island in the sky existing when he finds an old map of an island called Skypiea, and without hesitation, he immediately decides that's where the crew is headed next. Before they can do that though, they run into some trouble with Donkey Kong and his crew of salvagers, but even worse, sea giants. Man, when I tell you the first time I saw these, I was shook. It was the first time I felt like the Grand Line was actually a real issue for the pirates, and that there was no way they're making it out of here alive. Like, these sea giants were 1,000 times bigger than the ship, which really makes the reveal later of what they actually are so much cooler, but I'll get to that at the end of Skypiea. But almost instantly, the scale of adventure and danger this show hints at makes it seem so much bigger than before. So far, when you think of grand adventures the crew has been on, the craziest one has been going up Reverse Mountain, which ultimately just led them back into the ocean. But now there's potential proof that an island and ocean in the sky exist. There's massive sea giants watching over the Grand Line. This was all so crazy, and it got me really excited just to be along for the ride. However, before the crew can get into the Sky Island, they needed to figure out how the hell you get into a Sky Island, which is when we stop at the nearest place for some potential information, Mock Town. While Zoro, Nami, and Luffy head into town, Sanji, Chopper, and Usopp stay to repair the Merry and had one of my favorite moments in the show so far. I just love how goofy these guys are. What was supposed to be just a quick pit stop to maybe learn more about Skypiea ended up becoming a melting pot of pirates and conflict, which can all be summed up by the interactions with 3 different characters: Bellamy, Cricket, and this guy who loves cherry pie. What I really liked about this arc and the characters it introduced was the sheer contrast and values they all stood for and how it played out in the story. Let's take the first character for example, Bellamy. On the surface, Bellamy and his crew just felt like simple villains, just a group of bullies who really only care about money and fame and pirating. They walk around with bravado, bully anyone who dares oppose them, and only cares about being a pirate because it means they can do whatever they want without any repercussions, hiding behind their captain's devil fruit powers. However, I think the purpose Bellamy served in this arc was really important to Luffy's overall character development. Now, I'll be totally honest with you guys, in the first few moments I saw Bellamy, I did kind of think he was cool, mainly because of his cool looking jacket. And I did think the design of his crew was also unique to any of the pirate crews we had seen so far. But boy was I wrong. This moment set the entire stage for how we're gonna view Bellamy. And even more importantly, this scene adds a lot of depth to Luffy and the type of pirate he is. First, Bellamy slams Luffy into the table and Zoro gets to have a little aura farm moment, which you know I always love to see. But then, Bellamy gives a speech. And in this speech, he talks about how the new era of pirates will be those who give up on the older, quote-unquote, fairy tales and dreams of the pirates before them chasing stuff like Sky Island or the One Piece. This new age of pirates will take what's in front of them and not waste their times with dreams and wishes. His crew mocks Nami for asking the bartender about Sky Island, claiming it was just an old busted myth about ships falling down after being shot into the sky. This speech sparks a really defining moment for Luffy. As he's sitting on the floor getting pelted with bottles and trash, he looks up to Zoro and tells him no matter what, do not fight back. This really took me by surprise when he said this, as I, and I'm sure a lot of you, were expecting Luffy to go into Luffy mode and kick his ass. Even Nami was confused. However, this was not the case. Luffy decides to let Bellamy and his crew rough him and Zoro up without any retaliation, and Bellamy ends up kicking them out of the bar for being too pathetic to fight back. And what took me a bit of understanding but eventually clicked, is that the way Luffy handled this situation is a direct callback to how Shanks handled the group of bandits during his backstory. Could him and Zoro have taken out this entire crew right there in that bar? Yeah. But like Shanks said, not every situation needs to be solved with violence. Luffy realized that as Bellamy was going on and on about how pointless the dreams of pirates are, there was nothing more to do here. Beating Bellamy senseless wouldn't change his mindset, and it would only cause the crew more hurdles as they try to reach their dream of going to Sky Island. This situation really showed a lot of maturity and inner strength for Luffy, as he was able to demonstrate his ability to restrain fighting an opponent whose pure intentions were basically just pathetic rage bait. And I gained even more respect for Zoro here, as he just blindly accepted getting a beatdown if it meant following Luffy's request, showing just how much trust and respect he has in Luffy as his captain. I really love their dynamic together when stuff like this happens. What makes this whole interaction even more meaningful comes right after this scene when they leave the bar and run into the next character on our list, Mr. Cherry Pie Guy, aka Marshall D. Teach, aka Blackbeard, aka not Goldie Roger. If you're someone who's been keeping up with my live tweets of the show, then you might have seen this, my masterpiece of a theory, where I truly thought that this was Goldie Roger who had maybe faked his death or something. I feel like this wasn't that crazy of a theory. Like how intentionally intense and meaningful they made this interaction between Luffy and Blackbeard, a person whose identity we still didn't know at the time. I feel like it kind of made sense. Although to be fair, I guess a lot of people probably saw Gold Roger's face on his wanted posters over the years, so they would have known if it was him. Alright, fine, I admit, I was wrong. Alright, anyway. As the three of them leave the bar, they run into the same guy who just moments earlier was inside arguing with Luffy about the taste of cherry pie, in truly one of the most unique villain introductions of any story I've ever seen. Luffy was literally more upset at Blackbeard's pie opinion than he was about Bellamy kicking his ass. As they're outside, Blackbeard begins to reassure Nami that the way Luffy and Zoro just handled Bellamy was the best thing they could have done. He counters everything Bellamy was preaching, stating the dreams of people will never end, and to be able to outdo others around you, you have to stick to your dreams against all odds, and it's no easy task. And the way Luffy just blankly stares at Blackbeard here as he hears the same sentiment that Shanks taught him years ago, and even having Shanks and Ace appear on the screen, you just know this interaction was important. To me, I still can't really tell if maybe Luffy recognized Blackbeard in this moment, or perhaps he was just stunned hearing someone in this town echo the same sentiment as him, but it really did seem like something much deeper was happening. He also tells Nami it's not a he when referring to Blackbeard, I assume implying he somehow knew this person had a crew of people with him. I'm really curious if there was more to this interaction or if I'm just overthinking everything, but it really was an interesting moment in the arc for me. After Luffy, Nami, and Zoro finish their interactions with Bellamy and Cherry Pie Guy, they head over to the other end of the island and meet the final important character of the arc, Mont Blanc Cricket. Cricket's story is really where the arc starts setting up the larger mystery of Skypiea. When we first meet him, he just seems like another side character, an old guy living with giant monkeys who spends every day diving into the ocean looking for treasure. But the more we learn about Cricket, the more you realize there's much deeper reason into what he's doing. Cricket is a descendant of the explorer Mont Blanc Nolan, a man who once claimed to have discovered a city of gold on the island of Jaya. However, when Nolan later returned to his king to prove it, the city and even the island were both gone. With no evidence to support his story, Nolan was labeled a liar and executed, turning his and his family's name into an infamous folktale. Ever since then, Cricket has spent his entire life diving into the waters around Jaya, searching for proof that the city of gold really did exist. However, he doesn't do this for the money and gold, but because his whole life he's had to deal with the consequences of an ancestor's actions. In an interesting way, I think learning about Cricket's lifelong dedication to this somewhat ties together a core theme of Jaya about believing in dreams. We've seen Bellamy, who's someone that laughs at the idea of believing in a dream. We've seen Blackbeard, someone who believes the opposite, that dreams of the people will never die. And now Cricket, a man who's a living example of this and has spent his entire life dreaming of one day setting the record straight about his family's name. His dream might not sound as grand or adventurous as what we usually picture dreams to be, but it's something he's devoted his entire life to and continue to believe in even when the rest of the world thinks it's a myth. And knowing how Skypiea ends, Cricket's character is really a beautiful way to give so much more meaning into how the story unfolds, making it more than just a cool adventure story. And I'm not sure if I really grasped that concept much during my watch, but sitting here and looking back at the arc after finishing Skypiea, I think it's a really cool way of looking at these three main Jaya characters. But what really sells Cricket's importance is how Luffy reacts to him. Even though for hundreds of years people have mocked the family history, Luffy treats Cricket's story with respect. Later on, when Luffy learns that Bellamy attacked Cricket and stole the gold he was saving, everything comes full circle. While Luffy didn't fight Bellamy earlier because it wouldn't change anything, now it was much different. Now someone's dream and their entire life purpose had been messed with. And we know for Luffy, that's where the line is drawn. I really liked the sequence of events because it kept building up Luffy as a character more and more. Cricket had told Luffy multiple times to just let it go and that it wasn't his problem. Nami reinforced that there's a good chance he wouldn't make it back in time, but did any of that stop Luffy? Of course not. If someone has been wronged, you know he's gonna make sure it's fixed. Of course, Bellamy also attacked the Mary on his rampage, but I think this was more about Cricket. And while Luffy's running there, we learn his bounty has now shot up to 100 million berry, only amplifying that this right here is the GOAT. Luffy arrives into town and whoo, let me tell you, this scene got me so hyped. Probably a top 2 most satisfying moment in the show so far. When Bellamy all of a sudden hears his name shouted from outside of the pub, only to go outside and see Luffy posted up on a rooftop under the moonlight staring right down at him. This shot was so sick, and I love the symbolism that Luffy's finally being the one looking down at Bellamy after spending the entire arc in reverse. Just a cheeky nod to how their morals come into play. The two get into it as Bellamy starts showing off his bounce fruit ability while yapping to Luffy. He's mocking Luffy, Nolan, and the dreams of pirates. His crew is hyping him up as he pinballs off the buildings at quicker and quicker speed. And right as he goes to attack, BAM! Luffy punches him straight into the wood and leaves a literal indent on his face. Absolute peak. The way Luffy just stood there motionless as Bellamy bounced around making all this commotion just to lay him out flat with a single punch was so satisfying. No one's doing it like Luffy. Luffy gets Cricket's gold back, returns to the crew, and you can tell Cricket has a newfound respect for Luffy, seeing how passionate he is about his own dreams and the dreams of others. All the build up with Cricket, Bellamy, and the arc's discussion of dreams really made the story of Skypiea hit so much harder. It took the already existing idea of finding an island in the sky and elevated it by giving the entire journey a deeper meaning. Just before the crew heads off for Skypiea, the Jaya arc includes one last section, which is a lot of setup for the grander One Piece story. Now, there isn't really much to interpret from these interactions besides just really noting what happened, so I'm gonna list all the things that seemed important. The first being that Ace has somehow found himself on Buggy's ship. We learn that Ace has a high position in the Whitebeard pirate crew, and that Whitebeard is an extremely strong pirate who was only bested by Gold Roger. We see Whitebeard for the first time, and bro's just massive. He's also labeled the strongest man alive, which I'm curious to see in action. Shanks has sent a member of his crew to deliver Whitebeard a letter relating to something about Ace and Blackbeard, to which Whitebeard is offended by Shanks not coming in person and rips up the letter. Drama. And the last main part is from a place called the Holy Land, which sounds really intimidating. We see a group of old dudes in suits called the Elder Council, who I assume at this time are the head of the government since they talk about what they're gonna do regarding Luffy taking down Crocodile. All the government and military officials here host a meeting about replacing Crocodile, and included in this meeting are some of the warlords of the sea. Doflamingo, a guy with a funny walk, a fluffy pink coat, and what seems like the ability to control people with his mind or something like that. Bartholomew Kuma, great name, an insanely tall dude with a Bible in his hand, and Mihawk. As they begin the discussions, they're interrupted by a mysterious man claiming he has a good replacement for them in mind. This man is revealed to be Lafitte, a member of the Blackbeard Pirates, who believes Blackbeard would be the perfect fit. And at the time, we still don't know who Blackbeard is. But then it cuts back to Mocktown and we learn exactly who Blackbeard and the Blackbeard pirates are. Cherry frickin' Pie Guy. What a great plot twist. I loved the reveal of this twist for 3 main reasons. 1, it made his introduction as a character with the pie scene that much funnier. 2, it made Bellamy's character kind of a red herring all along. All of the first few moments of Jaya were Blackbeard's crew, like Van Augur sniping the birds from far away or Don Q offering Luffy explosive apples. However, at the time, we don't know these characters are all connected and seem like random pirates on the island, to which our attention quickly gets directed towards Bellamy and his crew. And 3, after seeing Blackbeard's crewmate Lafitte vouch for him as a replacement warlord of the sea, you realize just how powerful this character really is, how much crazier his interaction with Luffy was, and the Straw Hats are now kinda in a bit of danger. I can't lie, Blackbeard's crew has some real aura, and Van Augur might be the toughest name for a sniper I've ever heard. With Cricket's gold returned, Bellamy getting a new permanent tattoo, and Blackbeard on the hunt, the crew climb aboard Chicken Mary and set off for the knock-up stream as they begin the adventure of the island in the sky, Skypiea. To me, the entrance into Skypiea was one of the coolest moments of the show so far. This group of lovable idiots that have somehow found each other in life are now riding a giant jet stream into the sky together. Everyone's so excited, the show's main theme starts to play, and it was just such a beautiful way to begin the arc and amplified everything I love about One Piece's adventure. Up until this point, the Straw Hats have been on adventures like going up Reverse Mountain or visiting different islands in the Grand Line, but this felt so much different. This wasn't just the next island in the ocean, they were entering an entirely different world. The White Sea, shells being used for gadgets, clouds used for construction. Everything about Skypiea had such a unique feel to it that I really appreciated. It was one of those moments that made me think I truly have no idea what to expect in the future for this show. Once the crew makes it into the sky, no time is wasted for things to start escalating. Usopp accidentally attracts a sea beast when we get to see new Robin abilities, a Shandian guy almost bazookas their ship, and they meet this old guy in Dark Souls armor, Gonfall the Sky Knight, who tells them this island will be very dangerous for them. He gives them a one-time use whistle that will signal him to come help in any danger, which sets up one of the funniest chopper moments that I'll get to later. As the crew eventually arrives at Angel Island, they meet 2 citizens, Conus and Pagaya, where the arc starts laying out the culture of Skypiea. Conus explains how the island's structure works, we start learning about dial technology, and like I said before, the whole place just has this really creative feel to it. And a big plot point, the arc starts laying the groundwork of how important religion plays a role in this society. The crew entered through a thing called Heaven's Gate, the ruler is called God, the laws and social structures of the island are heavily influenced around divine authority, so even before Eneru is introduced, it's heavily enforced how much a deity will play a role in the story unfolding. And I think this becomes really clear the moment Nami takes a waiver for a spin near the Forbidden Land. This for me became the real early selling point of Skypiea. As the crew is getting Verth explained to them and how it's off limits for anyone to ever enter, Nami happens to stumble across it and see a man getting smited into oblivion by a massive lightning strike at the time. This was insane. First of all, the visuals and music here were incredible. How the show made this impact hit harder by turning everything black and white and let the blue lightning strike stick out even more was so cool. I remember watching this and being like, what the hell, they are screwed. The crew straight up dealing with an actual god. With how fun the entrance into the sky was, all the crazy things that have happened to them already, and now a lightning wielding god in the picture, I was genuinely confused how anyone could think this arc is boring, because the whole time I'm just sitting here like, dude, this is gonna be insane. The crew gets split up as some of them are dragged away to Upper Yard on the Going Merry, while the others now have to go after them. With the introduction to the island and storyline setup, we begin to meet the main characters of this arc, Eneru, the rest of God's army, and the Shandians. Let's start with Eneru. To me, I think Eneru is the most entertaining villain in One Piece so far. First of all, he looks exactly like Slim Shady. Part of me was hoping we'd end all this conflict and Enel would just put on a concert for the Shandians. What I thought was the most entertaining part about Eneru was his attitude, and also how we never really knew how powerful he could be until the very end of the arc. Previous main villains like Crocodile or Arlong were a bit more calculated and came off intimidating in how they presented themselves. Eneru doesn't do any of that. He knows he's strong as hell and he doesn't have to care about anything else. And while I do think his overconfidence ends up being his downfall in a very similar fashion to Bellamy, it is an extremely entertaining trait for your main villain to have and sets up a great moment that of course we'll get to later. What really added to his character later on was when he basically turned all the conflict happening into a game, voiding any empathy, stating that only 5 people of the 81 on the island would be able to survive. Him having mantra powers on top of that and being able to sense what's happening all around the island was crazy too. Like he's basically just playing an RTS game with real people. Then you have his 4 main priests, who, I'll be honest, were the first part of the arc I was kind of mixed on. The concept of the 4 priests, their designs, and their structure for controlling different parts of the Upper Yard was all great, and I think it did a great job of adding to the suspense. I just think some of their fights later on were a bit whatever, but we'll get to that soon. Then we had our last characters, the Shandians. And despite what I've seen people say online about the Shandians being uninteresting characters and not important to the overall story of One Piece, I actually think they make the story way more interesting, because now this arc is no longer just the Straw Hats versus Eneru. The Shandians are a group of warriors fighting to reclaim their homeland, and that immediately adds a whole new layer of meaning to how the Straw Hats' adventure on this island is going to unfold. Now, there's history and pride behind the conflict, and instead of Skypiea just being about the Straw Hats stopping some evil god, it becomes this much larger conflict where multiple groups all want completely different things from the same land. And to me, that made the story feel way more alive. It also helps that the Shandians don't feel weak or helpless either, like a lot of the side characters we've encountered in the show so far. From early on, we're shown that these are a serious force to be reckoned with on the island, with aggressive and powerful characters like Wiper, who instantly make that obvious. You even have this Shandian child, Isa, who has the mantra ability too, which I thought was a really important detail because it showed that this wasn't something exclusive to Eneru and his crew, but there was more mystery to uncover here. It helps make the world feel more layered, and it also makes the Shandians feel even more connected to the land and the conflict happening around them. So even before you fully learn all the details behind their history, the Shandians already do a great job of making this whole island feel like a place with a real ongoing war attached to it. With all this conflict of the arc brewing, we get some pretty cool fights, but just before that, there's one more important thing we learn that completely changed my perception of the story, and that was when Nami, Zoro, and Robin discover the second half of Cricket's house. This reveal showing us that all this time, the Verth section of Skypiea was part of Jaya all along and had been shot into the sky hundreds of years ago by a knock-up stream was honestly mind-blowing, and some of the most creative storytelling that I've ever seen. You had the story of Nolan, who was literally executed for claiming Jaya had a city of gold, only to return and find that nothing was even there to prove it. You had Cricket, who's had to live with the repercussions of Nolan his entire life and has been searching for this land. And you had the Shandians, who were natives on this part of the island years ago, whose entire lives got literally uprooted as their homeland was relocated into the sky, and now have to fight a deity against their will to protect it. Just one simple discovery looped in so many storylines in such a magnificent way, I truly can't sit here and glaze Oda more. Something so simple as a part of the island being displaced became this incredible plot point with all the different webs of context he wove before it, and this would only get amplified more as the arc concludes later on. After learning more about Upper Yard, Eneru, and his army, the arc starts laying out all the different conflicts happening at once. We had God's army versus the Shandians versus the Straw Hats, and the Straw Hats versus God's army. And I think this right here is one of Skypiea's biggest strengths. There's tension coming from all directions, which makes the conflict feel way more intricate than just the Straw Hats versus Eneru. Everybody's clashing together, and it gave the arc a very layered feeling. This to me kind of felt like a new spin on what Alabasta had done. In Alabasta, multiple factions were involved in conflict: the Rebels, the Kingdom, Baroque Works, and the Straw Hats. But even with all those moving parts, it still mostly boiled down to two sides, because the Straw Hats and the Rebels were ultimately pushing towards the same goal. In Skypiea, it's much more of a free-for-all battle, at least to begin with. Before we get into the rest of the arc, which is just conflict after conflict, I do want to take a second to note just how much fun and wholesomeness there was included in this arc as well. Between the chaos, this arc still leaves room for the Straw Hats to be just lovable idiots, and furthers our bond with them now with Robin on the crew. There was the Wolf Dance Party, which is one of those scenes that perfectly reminds you why this crew is so much fun. After learning everything that's happened on an island that they're about to all be involved in, they still decide to throw a party and get down to having fun with some creatures in the forest. And I'm not gonna lie, they were getting lit. This arc was also so funny, and had so many funny moments, like Luffy singing with his stick, Zoro turning into Tarzan, Chopper blowing the whistle, and so many others. Just so many great goofy moments that made me love the arc. We even had some story building when Usopp sees someone repair the Mary in the distance but can't figure out who, and the crew figuring out the map is actually a skull and knowing now where the treasure is. In an arc filled with so much combat and conflict, there was just so much wholesome and fun energy spread throughout it as well. And I think that balance is a huge part why Skypiea works and why I loved it so much. We then get into the many fights of this arc, and there were a lot, so I'm gonna focus on the ones that felt most important to me. First, we had the fights versus the four priests. The first being Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp versus Satoru. This to me was the worst of the four and probably the weakest fight in the whole arc. Satoru himself was a bit annoying and the fight went on for way too long for my liking. Then we had the aerial battle above the Going Merry of Gonfall versus the second priest, Shura. This fight in my opinion was way better, as the aerial combat between the two and the use of the flame dials was really cool. I also really liked Shura's design and his fighting style. This was also where we get one of the funniest Chopper scenes that I mentioned earlier, when he blows the Gonfall whistle literally frame one of hearing any danger, which in hindsight worked worked out for him, but it was still so funny. He also got obliterated, which I did not like, and Oda, do not ever do that again. The third fight we had was Chopper versus Gedatsu. This fight wasn't bad in my opinion, but it was definitely really goofy. Gedatsu, being an absolute idiot, kind of made Chopper the funniest opponent to go up against, since he hasn't really 1v1 much yet. But my boy Chopper pulled through, and he low-key cooked. He used a lot of different techniques during the fight. And lastly, we had Zoro versus Ohm. Ohm was the coolest priest in my opinion, both in design and fighting style. His transforming sword was really cool, and he had a massive dog who was just ready to square up on command. Zoro hits him with a badass move, per Zoro usual, and takes him out. Besides the priest, there were a few other really cool fights on this arc that I want to mention, like Zoro versus Braum, which was a fun battle, or Luffy versus Wiper. This fight was animated so well. It was easily one of my favorites from the whole arc, and I loved the double bazooka on each other at the end. There was also Robin versus Yama, which I liked a lot. This fight was great because we really got to see Robin in full action here, using a ton of her devil fruit power techniques and besting this villain who's like 10 times her size. But also, during this fight, she was really adamant on protecting the ruins around her, showcasing her personality to us really well as she begins to join the crew permanently. With all these different fights occurring on the island, we inch closer to the real threat of the entire operation, facing Eneru. Throughout this arc, Eneru has given us breadcrumbs of just how powerful and terrifying he really is. Like when he gives Kamakiri and crew a free window to attack him, and even after being stabbed in the head, he brushes it off and then cooks them. Or the moment when he instantly teleports to Rocky and fries her circuits after tanking a couple bullets, to which then he blasts the entire ruins above him down without breaking a sweat. Dude was just so powerful, and I was really getting curious how they were even gonna beat him. Then, in my opinion, the arc starts to get super entertaining as we get to the next 3 fights, all against Eneru. First, we had the 4v1. Eneru versus Zoro, Gonfall, Wiper, and Robin. This fight was so sick. Even if it wasn't for very long, it became a big hook in the arc and the show for me overall again. Zoro got to showcase some crazy moves, and Wiper was actually able to penetrate a move onto Eneru using Sea Stone, which broke the illusion that nothing could stop him. Then he broke that illusion again when he just revived himself, which was insane. Like, this guy's actually just unstoppable. But then you get to the absolutely incredible section when Eneru and Luffy initially fight, which is obviously one of the best moments of the whole arc. I love the beginning of this fight when Nami is essentially forced to go with Eneru, which she clearly thinks is her only option at that point. But then all of a sudden she hears Luffy scream from outside the cave, and she just starts breaking down. Just knowing Luffy had arrived brought back all her hope. All this build up in the arc around Eneru being this untouchable god and all the bravado he's portrayed so far gets completely shattered when he tries to hit Luffy with a huge fatal lightning, and right then it hit. Luffy's made of rubber and his lightning strikes won't work. Eneru's face alone had me dying, and I was happy to learn that this is a famous scene in the show's community because of it. This was just such a peak moment. I did see that this seems to be a polarizing topic in the One Piece community though, just because of how simple Luffy's counter was to him. But to me, I think this was the perfect way to counter someone like Eneru. From Eneru's overconfidence the whole arc, how little he tried compared to how powerful he was, it felt undeserved and that he was taking it all for granted. And so the simple fact that Luffy is someone who he just can't hurt was a perfect taste of his own medicine. And finally, we get to the third fight of this section on the arc maxim with Nami, Usopp, and Sanji, which also has some great moments. Usopp does a sick flip, Sanji aura farms, saying he was just about to ask Eneru for a cigarette light after getting zapped, which was by far my favorite Sanji moment in the whole show so far, and Luffy's just stuck with a giant golden ball attached to his arm. As this fight escalates, we're left with Eneru summoning a massive, slow-falling ball of lightning that will completely eliminate Skypiea if it reaches the floor, as we've now hit the ultimate climax of the arc. With Eneru's imminent doom approaching, there's 2 more main points I want to quickly cover that added to the suspense of everything and escalated the tension even further. And the first is going to be a character who I think is extremely underrated in the One Piece universe, my GOAT, Konis. And if you don't believe she's my GOAT, I asked all my friends who play the One Piece trading card game to give me their Konis cards. So I now have probably the biggest Konis collection in the world. Yeah. She's my GOAT. Konis was a character in the arc who I think played such an amazing and important role, as she had one of the best character developments that I've seen. When we first meet Konis, this sweet and innocent girl, she ends up confessing, stating she was the one who got the Going Merry taken away along with half of the crew. She didn't do this because she was mean, she did this because of how terrified everyone on the island is of God's power, noting that any betrayal or doubt of his power would get you smited, which she almost was. But as the arc goes on and she begins to learn what's truly happening, and after seeing her father get destroyed by lightning, she begins to to gain the courage to do one of the most important parts of the whole story. Conus stands up to the military and goes against everything she's ever known by facing the entire town and telling them that they can no longer let God's judgment dictate their actions. Even after being pelted by a tomato, holding her own against a military recruit, and risking her life by shouting she doesn't believe Eneru is a god, she stands her ground and does her best to convince everyone that their best course of action is to evacuate. Her speech honestly was so incredible and has stuck with me so far in the show. This was a character who started the story innocent and stricken by fear, someone who literally betrayed the Straw Hats, this group of nice people, because that fear was so deeply ingrained in her, to someone who's able to stand up against all odds and speak for the sake of everyone. And that is why Conus is my GOAT. With Eneru's lightning getting closer to the ground and Conus attempting to evacuate everyone from the island, we get one more final important part of the arc, the Noland and Kalgara backstory. This flashback was heartbreaking. Two men from completely different worlds slowly build respect for each other, only for everything to fall apart before they even get the chance to make it right. Noland leaves on bad terms, Kalgara shouts that he didn't mean it and to return someday, but the day Noland returns, the entire island is gone, so they're never able to see each other again. And that sadness ties back so perfectly to Cricket, because now everything he dedicated his life to trying to prove suddenly has even more emotional meaning behind it. It's not just about whether the City of Gold existed and that Noland was a liar, it's about one of the most heartbreaking misunderstandings ever. Now, with all the storylines explained and Noland's backstory fresh in our mind, Eneru prepares to destroy everything, which brings us to the final fight, the final Luffy vs Eneru battle. This is where Skypiea fully cashes in on how epic and ridiculous its scale has become, as an entire city of people begin to flee destruction, with a giant ball of lightning slowly descending onto them. Luffy and Nami have probably my favorite scene in the entire arc, where they ride a frickin' water waver up a 200-foot tall beanstalk that's falling over to make a ramp onto the Arc Maxim. Wiper yells to Luffy with generations of history behind him to light the fire of Shandora and take out Eneru. Like, this was so epic. The animation in the scene was so cool, and just the concept of the situation they're in right here was so crazy. I don't understand how anyone could ever think this arc is boring. Truly. Luffy's able to pull off a really cool move and blows up the giant lightning ball, clearing up the sky so the sun comes out in such a cool moment. Then, Luffy and Eneru fight in the sky. Eneru levels up even more into this lightning god form, but it's still no match for Luffy. And the defining moment to cap off the arc, Luffy slams the giant golden ball through Eneru and rings the bell so loud that it can be heard on land, as he screams to Cricket that the City of Gold has been in the sky all this time. The voice acting here was so incredible. I have to give it up to the sub voice actor for Luffy. She is really incredible. And as the tears began to fall on my face here with this moment, it only got worse. It cuts to Cricket on Earth smiling up as he's heard the bell ring for the first time in his whole life, signaling his life search wasn't for nothing. The sound of the bell is Nolan and Kalgara's tragedy finally getting an emotional resolution. And to top it all off, Luffy's shadow appears as a giant in the sky, showing us that the sea giants back at the beginning of Jaya were never giant monsters at all. They were shadows of the people forced to live in the sky. And that is just incredible story writing. The moment the shadow appeared on the screen was honestly one of the coolest reveals in any story I've ever seen. Not only a callback to something I had previously thought would be a major issue for the crew to deal with later, but just a completely unexpected, yet now fully believable way of twisting the story into something emotionally satisfying. And this, my friends, is why I think Skypiea is worth every second. But there's one more important part, and that's how this arc wraps up. At the end of Skypiea, Robin discovers the poneglyph that reveals to us there was a point in time called the Void Century, and we get confirmation that Gold Roger had been to Sky Island before, as he left a note next to the poneglyph. This was a crazy revelation, and what's even crazier is when Gonfall says that Luffy reminds him a lot of Gold Roger, which is just another hint that I believe they're connected in some way besides just having the same middle initial. I was fully convinced here Roger was his grandfather or something, but regardless, this revelation again that Robin can read ancient texts, Roger was on Skypiea, and new information that a Void Century exists makes Skypiea feel way more important than just an island in the sky arc now. It makes it feel all connected to the deeper mysteries of the One Piece story to come. Lastly, I love how this arc wraps up with one last perfect Straw Hat moment. The people of Skypiea basically don't care about the gold, as they just wanted their land back, so they tell Robin they can take whatever they want with them. Meanwhile, the Straw Hats pull together a plan to steal as much small amounts of gold as they can and run off into the wind feeling like they just pulled off the greatest pirate heist of all time. And Robin just lets them believe it as she plays along. She doesn't ruin the moment or correct them, she just lets these goofballs have their wholesome pirate fantasy. This scene made me really feel like Robin is gonna fit in just fine with this his crew. And with that, we wrap the story of Skypiea. The adventure here was huge, the island is intricate and detailed, the conflict is way more layered than you could ever expect, Eneru raised the power scaling ceiling of this show like crazy, and the whole thing ties together with one of the most emotional and satisfying payoffs in the story so far. I truly don't know how somebody could watch all of that come together and walk away thinking this arc wasn't worth their time. Now, with that said, I can't sit here and claim this was the most perfect piece of media ever shown to me, as I do think there are some fair criticisms of the arc, and the first one being the pacing. The pacing of this arc can definitely feel slow at times. Some of the priest fights, some of the stories with the Shandians, Nolan's backstory, there were plenty of moments where I feel like condensing the story a bit would really do it a lot of justice. I also mentioned earlier that I think some of the priests are much more memorable than others. When you compare this second in command group to the likes of second in command at Baroque Works, it's a pretty clear divide, and I think with how strong Eneru was, they could have been more of an issue for sure. And lastly, I think some of the side characters in the arc don't hit as hard as some of the main emotional pieces do. When I watched this arc as a whole, I think all the side characters played their role really well and I didn't mind them too much. But once the arc finished and you see how much or how little some of them actually became, I can see the fair criticism here. Thus, I can totally see some parts of Skypiea not working for everyone, a lot of it coming down to what you enjoy most about anime storylines, either with fighting, characters, story, etc. But for me, the highs of the adventure, the scale of conflict, the emotional payoff of ringing the bell, and the way it all ties back to Jaya makes a lot of those issues seem minuscule compared to the absolute pleasure it was to watch this story unfold. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I think Skypiea is an incredible arc. I hope you enjoyed the video. I put a lot of time into it trying to capture all my favorite moments and important bits. If you liked the video, please consider hitting it with a like and a subscribe, as it'll help the video out a lot. If you'd like to see a review of the next part of this show, I do have a video up already of the Water 7 saga, including Long Ring Longland, Water 7, and Eni's Lobby, which were some of my favorite arcs by far. If you're new, I do live tweet my watch of One Piece over on my Twitter, so if you'd like to see that, come on by. It's been a lot of fun. But until next time, thanks for watching. See you later.